The Midnight Garden by Hogwild, Cravings. Audiobooks. Chapter 1. The Stranger at the Gate. The iron gate groaned as Vivienne Marchand pressed her palm against the cold metal, the sound swallowed by the warm Mediterranean night. She shouldn't have been there. The invitation had been clear: dinner at 8, the villa on the hill, formal attire. What it hadn't mentioned was that the host, Lucien Deveraux, was the one man in all of Provence she'd sworn never to see again. The gravel path crunched beneath her heels as she made her way through the garden. Lavender and jasmine competed for her attention, their perfume thick in the humid air. Lanterns hung from olive trees, casting pools of amber light that made the stone walls glow like embers. It was devastatingly beautiful. The kind of place designed to make a woman forget her better judgment. She paused at the fountain at the center of the courtyard. Water cascaded over a marble figure, a woman mid-dance, frozen in a moment of abandon. Vivienne understood the feeling. 5 years ago, she had been that woman, reckless, consumed, dancing at the edge of something she couldn't control. "You came." His voice arrived before he did, low and unhurried, like smoke curling through the darkness. She turned, and there he was. Lucien Deveraux. Taller than she remembered, or maybe it was the way the shadows carved his jaw, sharpened the angles of his face. His dark hair was longer now, swept back carelessly, and his eyes, those impossible gray eyes, held the same quiet intensity that had undone her the first time. "I was invited," she said, keeping her voice even. It would have been rude to decline. "Since when do you care about being rude?" A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. He stepped closer, and she caught his scent, cedar and something darker, something that made her chest tighten. "Since I grew up," she replied. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze traveling over the lines of her black dress, the way it caught the light at her collarbone. Not predatory. Something worse. Appreciative, as if he were memorizing a painting he'd been forced to return. "You look extraordinary," he said simply. She didn't thank him. Thanking him would have been an opening, and she knew better than to give Lucien Deveraux an opening. "Where are the other guests?" she asked, glancing toward the villa's glowing windows. "There are no other guests." The words landed between them like a match on dry kindling. She felt the heat of it immediately. Anger, yes, but beneath that, something far more dangerous. "You tricked me. I invited you. There's a difference." "The difference being?" He tilted his head, and the lantern light caught his eyes, turning them silver. "The difference being that if I'd told you it was just the two of us, you never would have come. And I needed you to come." Needed? The word felt foreign in his mouth. Lucien Deveraux didn't need anyone. That had been the problem from the start. "Needed," he repeated, quieter now. "Sit with me, Vivienne, please. One dinner, one conversation, and if you want to leave after that, I'll open the gate myself." She should have walked away. Every rational thought in her body was screaming at her to turn on her heel, march back through that garden, and never look back. But Vivienne had never been ruled by rational thoughts. Not when it came to him. "One dinner," she said. Chapter 2. The table between us. The table was set beneath a pergola draped in wisteria, the clusters of purple blossoms hanging low enough to brush her hair when she sat down. Silver cutlery gleamed. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight and scattered it across the white linen like tiny fallen stars. Lucien poured the wine himself, a deep burgundy that smelled of blackberries and rain-soaked earth. Their fingers brushed when he handed her the glass, and the contact sent a current up her arm that she disguised by taking a long, steadying sip. "You've done well," she said, gesturing at the villa. "The last time I was in Provence, this place was a ruin. It needed someone to care about it. And you cared. I had time. After you left, I had nothing but time." She set her glass down carefully. Don't do that. Do what? Make it sound like I left you. We ended. That's different. He leaned back in his chair, one arm draped over the side, the picture of casual grace. But his eyes gave him away. They always had. You're right, he said. We ended. I just never accepted the ending. The first course arrived, brought by a silent woman who appeared and vanished like a ghost. A delicate arrangement of burrata and heirloom tomatoes drizzled with olive oil that glistened like liquid gold. They ate in silence for a moment, the food almost painfully good, and Vivienne found herself remembering all the meals they'd shared before. In that tiny apartment in Paris, eating bread and cheese on the floor because neither of them owned a table. In Rome, at the trattoria where the owner's grandmother made pasta by hand and called Lucien Deveraux and pinched his cheeks. In that hotel in Marrakesh where they'd ordered room service and never touched it. What do you want, Lucien? She asked finally. The truth. He set down his fork, folded his hands. When he looked at her, the mask was gone. The charm, the composure, the calculated ease. What remained was rawer, more vulnerable, and infinitely more dangerous. I want another chance, he said. I know I don't deserve one. I know what I did, what I put you through. The disappearances, the silence, the way I kept one foot out the door because I was terrified of what it meant to be fully inside the room with you. I know all of it, Vivienne. I've had 5 years to sit with it. 5 years is a long time. Not long enough to forget you. Not even close. The candle between them flickered, casting his face in half shadow. She watched the flame dance in his eyes and felt something inside her. Something she'd bricked up, plastered over, painted a cheerful color and hung a picture frame on. Begin to crack. I'm not the same woman, she said softly. I know. That's part of why I'm asking. And you? Are you different? He was quiet for a moment. The night sounds filled the space. Crickets, the distant murmur of the fountain, the wind rustling through the wisteria above them. I stopped running, he said. I bought this ruin, and I rebuilt it, stone by stone. I planted the garden. I learned to stay in one place, and every morning I woke up, and the first thing I thought was your name. Chapter 3. The Garden Path. After dinner, they walked. It wasn't a decision, it was a gravitational pull, as inevitable as the tide. He led her deeper into the garden, past the fountain, through an archway of climbing roses so heavy with blooms that petals drifted down around them like perfumed snow. The moon had risen fully now, a swollen pearl hanging low over the hills. It turned the garden silver, transforming the familiar into the otherworldly. Vivienne felt like she'd stepped out of her ordinary life and into a fairy tale, the dangerous kind, where the enchantment comes at a price. I planted these for you, Lucien said, pausing beside a bed of midnight blue irises that seemed to pulse with color even in the moonlight. You always said irises were the most honest flower, beautiful without trying. You remembered that? I remember everything. She touched one of the petals. It was impossibly soft, like velvet warmed by sunlight, though it had been hours since the sun had set. Something about the gesture, the tenderness of it, the fact that he'd planted flowers for a woman he hadn't seen in 5 years, broke through her last defense. Why now? She whispered. Why after all this time? He turned to face her, and the moonlight did extraordinary things to his features, softened the hard lines, illuminated the sincerity in his expression. He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingertips grazed her jaw, and she felt the touch everywhere. Because I finally became someone worthy of asking, he said. The space between them was measured in inches now. She could feel the warmth of his body, could see the slight quickening of his breath that told her his composure was as thin as hers. Vivienne. Her name on his lips was half prayer, half permission. She closed the distance. The kiss began softly, a question, a negotiation, a tentative crossing of a border they'd both been standing at all evening. His hands found her waist, gentle at first, then firmer as she pressed against him. She tasted wine and desire, felt the slight tremor in his fingertips that told her he was as overwhelmed as she was. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers, both of them breathing hard. "Tell me to stop," he murmured. "No." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her knees uncertain. "Then come with me." Chapter 4. The room above the garden. He led her through a door she hadn't noticed, hidden behind a cascade of bougainvillea, up a narrow stone staircase that spiraled into one of the villa's towers. The room at the top was simple: white walls, dark wooden beams, gauze curtains billowing around open windows that framed the moonlit garden below. The bed was dressed in white linen, and candles, dozens of them, lined the windowsills and mantelpiece, their flames swaying in the warm breeze. "You planned this," she said, but there was no accusation in her voice. "I hoped," he corrected. "There's a difference." She turned to face him in the candlelight. The dress she wore had a single zipper that ran along her spine, and she reached behind herself and pulled it down in one smooth motion. The fabric whispered to the floor, and she stood before him in nothing but moonlight and firelight, and the absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was supposed to be. His reaction was everything. The sharp intake of breath, the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands curled at his sides as though he were holding himself back through sheer force of will. "My God!" he breathed. She stepped toward him, unbuttoned his shirt slowly, one button at a time, her fingers trailing over the warm skin she revealed. He was broader than before, harder, the years of manual labor having sculpted him in ways that made her pulse quicken. When the shirt fell away, she pressed her palms flat against his chest and felt his heartbeat, rapid, fierce, almost desperate. "Tell me what you want," he said, his voice rougher now, stripped of its usual polish. "I want you to stop being careful." Something shifted in his eyes, a door opening, a restraint breaking. He kissed her then, and this time there was nothing tentative about it. It was consuming, a declaration, 5 years of longing compressed into the pressure of his mouth against hers. His hands mapped the curve of her spine, the dip of her waist, pulling her so close that she could feel every line of his body against hers. They moved toward the bed in a slow, deliberate tangle, unwilling to break contact for even a second. When the backs of her knees hit the mattress, he eased her down with a tenderness that contradicted the hunger in his kiss. He hovered above her, candlelight painting gold across his shoulders, and looked at her as though she were the only real thing in the entire world. "I missed you," he whispered against her collarbone, his lips tracing a path that set every nerve ending ablaze. "Every single day." Her fingers threaded through his hair, pulling him closer. "Show me." And he did. With a patience that bordered on worship, he relearned every part of her. The hollow of her throat where her pulse fluttered, the sensitive skin below her ear that made her arch into him, the curve of her hip where his thumb traced slow, maddening circles. Every touch was deliberate, every kiss purposeful, as though he were writing a love letter with his body that he'd been composing for 5 long years. She was not passive. She met his intensity with her own, pulling him closer, wrapping around him, whispering his name in a voice she barely recognized. Lower, breathless, urgent. When skin met skin with nothing left between them, the sensation was electric, a full-body current that made them both gasp. "Look at me," she said, cupping his face. He did, and in his eyes she saw everything he'd never been able to say. the fear, the regret, the love that had outlasted his ability to run from it. They moved together with a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing, as ancient as the stone walls around them. The candlelight flickered across their intertwined bodies, casting dancing shadows. The warm night air carried the scent of jasmine through the open windows, wrapping around them like a blessing. Time became meaningless. There was only the feel of him, strong and tender, desperate and patient, whispering her name like an incantation. She felt herself unraveling, every carefully constructed wall she'd built crumbling under the weight of this thing between them that had never died, only waited, dormant, like seeds beneath winter soil. When the wave finally broke, it shattered them both. She cried out, and he caught the sound with his mouth, holding her through the trembling, his own body shuddering against hers. For a long, suspended moment, they existed outside of time. Two people who had been lost, now improbably found. Chapter 5. The morning after dawn arrived in watercolors, pale pink and gold seeping through the gauze curtains, painting the white walls in shades of rose. Vivienne woke slowly, awareness returning in layers. The weight of the linen sheet, the soreness in muscles she'd forgotten she had, the steady sound of breathing beside her. She turned her head. Lucien was awake, lying on his side, watching her with an expression of such unguarded tenderness that it made her heart ache. "How long have you been staring?" she murmured. "Long enough to be certain I'm not dreaming." She smiled, despite herself. "You always were impossibly romantic. Only with you. With everyone else, I'm appropriately cynical." She rolled onto her side to face him. In the morning light, she could see things the darkness had hidden. A thin scar above his eyebrow, new lines at the corners of his eyes, a scattering of gray at his temples. Time had changed him, softened some edges and sharpened others, and the result was a man who looked like he'd finally made peace with himself. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now I make you breakfast." "That's not what I meant." He reached out and laced his fingers through hers. "I know what you meant. And the answer is, whatever you want. I'm not going to pressure you, Vivienne. Last night was..." He paused, searching for the word. "Everything. But I won't cage it. If you need to leave, I'll let you go. If you want to stay, there's nowhere I'd rather you be." She studied their intertwined hands. His were rough now, calloused from the work of rebuilding, tanned from the Provençal sun. They were the hands of a man who had learned to build instead of burn. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Of me? Of how much I still feel. It was supposed to be over. I spent years convincing myself it was over. And then one evening, one dinner, one garden, and I'm right back where I started." He brought her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Not where you started. We're different people now. Better, I think. More honest, at least. You planted irises." "I planted irises for 5 years. I watered them every morning, even when it felt foolish. Especially when it felt foolish." She felt tears building and didn't fight them. They spilled silently, tracing warm paths down her cheeks. He caught them with his thumb, gentle as rain. "Stay," he whispered. "Not forever, not even for a week, just stay for breakfast. And then we'll see." She laughed through her tears, a real laugh, the kind she hadn't felt in years. "Breakfast feels like a very low bar. I'm a reformed man. I start small." She kissed him then, soft and slow, tasting morning and possibility and the fragile, fierce hope of two people who had learned the hard way that some things can't be outrun. "I'll stay for breakfast," she said. "And after breakfast?" She smiled. "Ask me after breakfast." The sun climbed higher, flooding the room with golden light. Below the window, the garden stirred to life, birds singing, bees humming among the lavender, the fountain murmuring its endless, patient song. And in the tower room above it all, two people lay tangled in white sheets and second chances, letting the morning unfold at its own unhurried pace. Neither of them mentioned the gate. Neither of them mentioned leaving. Some gardens, after all, are meant to be entered. And some doors, once opened, are meant to stay that way. The end.